A problem 8-4B, which is a bank reconciliation. So we're going to reconcile the differences between the bank balance, which is $9,100, and the balance per book, or the company, which is $59.58. So what we're going to do is compare the bank reconciliation from the previous month, October 2014, on the bottom of page 418, to the bank statement on the top of page 419, and the cash payments and receipts journals below the bank statements on page 419. So what we're going to do is begin with the last month's bank reconciliation and compare to understand if the deposit in transit as well as the outstanding checks were actually cleared by the bank. So starting with the deposit in transit of 842, we look at the deposits on the right hand stand of the bank statement, and on November 1st that deposit shows up. So since it shows up in both places, we don't need to include it on the reconciliation. Then we go to the checks. Okay, check number 2451 for $700. We look at the listing of checks, and there is no check number 2451, so we need to include that on our current reconciliation. Okay, then we check for check number 2470. It shows up for $396. We don't need to include that. Check number 2471 is included. Don't need to include that one. Check number 2472 does not show up in the bank statement list, so we need to include it on the bank reconciliation for $270. And then check number 2474 for $578 shows up, so we do not need to include check number 2474. So that takes care of the bank reconciliation from the previous month. So now we go to the cash payments journal of the current month to make sure that the checks were cleared by the bank. So check number 2475 in the cash receipts journal, cash payments journal, excuse me, shows up in the bank statement. We don't need to include that. Number 76 is included. Number 2477 is included on November 10th. We don't need to include that. 2478 for $300 does not appear on the bank statement, so we need to include that. Then we continue on the cash payments journal. Number 2479 for $890 shows up as $980 on the bank statement, so that's our first error. In the directions it says the errors were both on the book or the company side, so that's number 2479. So we take the difference, which is $90. Okay, so we need to subtract, since the bank statement shows that it was more than what the cash receipts journal says. Okay, so it's 2479. So continuing on, number 2480 is 714. It shows up. 2481 shows up for 382 in the bank statement. 2482 does not show up, so we need to include that number. Check number 2482 for $350. Okay, the next number in the cash payments journal is 2483. It shows up in the bank statement. We don't need to include that. Check number 2484 for $460 does not show up, so we need to include that. Then we go for 2485. Does not show up. We need to include that one. And the amount is $525. Then 2486 for $495 shows up in the bank statement. We don't need to include that. Then checks number 2487 and 2488 do not appear in the bank statement, so we need to include both of those. And 2488 is for $635. Okay, so my total outstanding checks are $34.50, which we subtract. So my current balance is $56.50. So now we need to check the deposits. We compare the cash receipts journal to the deposits. So the November 3rd deposit of $666 shows up on the 4th in the bank statement. Cash receipts on 11/7 is $545. It shows up on the 8th. On the 12th, we have the amount of $14.16. It shows up on the 13th. Then on the 17th, the amount for $8.10 shows up on the 18th. The amount on the 20th for $16.42 shows up at the bank for $16.24. So that's our second error. So we take the difference, that's $18. So the cash receipts journal was more than what was actually deposited, so we need to subtract. Then on the 24th, the amount of $14.12 shows up on the 25th. The amount on the 27th, $9.08, shows up on the 28th. And the amount on the 29th of $6.52 shows up on the 30th. And what does not show up is the amount in the cash receipts journal on November 30th of $25.41. So this is our deposit in transit. So we want to add that. So now my adjusted bank balance is $81.91. So now we need to look at the bottom of the two bank memoranda below the cash payments and receipts journal to see what the other differences are. So it says number one, we have a credit of $23.75 for a note collected, and we want to know that, or you can note that the interest and the collection fee of $91 and $16 respectively are already included in that credit amount. So that's $23.75. Oops, let me put that here. And then we see in number two, this is a debit for printing checks. So that's less. I'm going to subtract that out. Okay, so we know our grand total of what we subtract is 142, and so my adjusted book balance is 891. So both sides equal, and so now my statement, bank statement, and book statement balance are now reconciled.